Well, hello again. We're going to get on to the next part of our evening very quickly, but I will just remind folks that the bookstore is here, and if you'd like to purchase a copy of One Nation Under Sex, How the Private Lives of Presidents, First Ladies, and Their Lovers Changed the Course of American History, it will be available for sale, and Mr. Flynt has very kindly agreed to sign copies of it. So any of you who were wondering about what to get the kids for the holidays, your problems are solved right now. My two friends, actually, who have agreed to interview Mr. Flynt tonight, have told me they'd much rather have me just quickly get through the introductions and have them talk to you as opposed to my talking about them. So I'll just very quickly say this. Clay Calvert is a Brechner eminent scholar in mass communications and director of the Marion B. Brechner First Amendment Project at the University of Florida. Robert Richards is the John and Ann Curry Professor of First Amendment Studies at Penn State and the founding co-director of the Pennsylvania Center for the First Amendment at Penn State. Both of these gentlemen have written volumes on First Amendment law in all sorts of areas, and they have also filed numerous briefs on behalf of the First Amendment. Please join me in welcoming Clay Calvert and Bob Richards. Now, you've just had a 2-hour, 9-minute introduction of our next guest, so I'm not going to say a lot about that, other than to say that I think Larry Flynt would be the first person to concede that he's a controversial figure, and he certainly knows that there are a lot of people who object to what he does. But there are a lot of people who love what he does. But wherever you stand on that argument, one thing that can't be denied from the position of the First Amendment, this is a man who has fought numerous First Amendment battles, many of which it would have been a heck of a lot cheaper for him just to sort of say, fine, pay the fine, I'm done with it. But he didn't. He spent millions and millions of dollars in legal fees to fight for principles that he believed in. And interestingly enough, and I don't know if this will come out tonight, but something you may not be aware of, many of these First Amendment battles had nothing to do with nudity, had nothing to do with pornography. They had to do with other issues. And the case that he's most famous for, the case in which Jerry Falwell sued him for a satire that appeared in Hustler magazine, had absolutely nothing to do with pornography. So, it gives me great pleasure to welcome to you tonight, Mr. Larry Flynt, First Amendment warrior. Thank you.
Welcome, Larry.
We got to quit meeting like this.
I think it's fair to say that you've lived a fairly colorful and controversial life, and something that would be difficult to capture in a 2-hour and 9-minute movie. And I think a lot of people want to know, how realistic was that movie in portraying your life story?
Quite realistic. Of course, you know, anytime Hollywood's making a biopic of someone, they want to concentrate on the most outrageous aspects of your life, and that's to sell tickets. So you know that's going to happen. But overall, I think the movie was very well done.
And what do you think about Woody Harrelson playing you? How did he do in terms of that? What would you say? Rate him on it.
Woody plays me better than I play myself. They had gone through 4 months of trying to cast someone, and every new name they come up with, I just found even more depressing. And finally, Oliver called and said, "What do you think about Woody Harrelson?" And I immediately thought of a young Woody and Cheers, and I knew he had a great sense of humor, and as serious as this movie was, at the same time, it needed someone with that sense of humor to play the role, and I think Woody got it right.
Now, do you think Oliver Stone and Milos Forman, did they consult you on throughout the making of the movie?
Well, you know, you don't put millions of dollars into making a movie and give somebody script approval, so I never expected it, but both Milos and Oliver always accepted input from me on casting. And I think we had a great cast. I think that Milos Forman did a phenomenal job, but I think the real guy in this movie was Oliver Stone, because he was able to see from the very beginning that this was a movie that would have cultural impact. And here we are 15 years after the release of the movie, and it's still at the top of Sonny's list of movie rentals, and it's always being played on HBO and other cable channels. So it definitely has a cult following. And what also a lot of people don't know is the movie grossed more domestically, grossed more foreign than it did domestically, and I thought that was very unusual for that type of movie.
You just said the movie had a great cast, and one of those cast members was yourself. Sentencing yourself, basically, as Judge Morrissey. How was that playing in a movie? How many takes did you have to shoot of that?
Well, I was surprised as anyone that Milos would ask me to do that part, but you know, the judge was about the same age I was at the time that he sentenced me, and he was going to be sentencing Woody in the picture, so the little black glasses, if you remember from the movie, that I was wearing at the time, those were the identical glasses that Judge Morrissey wore in the courtroom, so it really wasn't a stretch, you know, for me to play him. But that was a pivoting point in my life, because I think you've got to stand before a judge and listen to him sentence you to 25 years in prison before you realize that freedom of expression is something that can no longer be taken for granted. And suddenly, the humor evaporates from all of this, and you realize that it's serious business, that you can go to jail for your art, for your printed words, or basically what you think. It's sad that we're still living in a culture that perpetuates this, but it's true.
Josh mentioned in his introduction that you've spent millions of dollars defending the First Amendment in many cases that do not directly relate to your own cases, but looking for access for journalists to battlefields and so forth. So it was that initial part when you were being sentenced to jail that you began to think about the importance of the First Amendment?
Yes, I began to think about it in a very serious way, and the crusade began at that time. And for those who can remember or read about it, you know, we were putting out censorship brush fires all over the country, and I was always there defending my right to publish, and there was always some prosecutor there ready to accommodate me. So that fight continued for the better part of 20 more years. And we were off in other areas that were related to the First Amendment, and it really started, you know, with Hustler, but it became front and center on our right to get the troops to get access during the war, and Ronald Reagan invaded Grenada without the press. We had a lot of fun with that, but they take us serious now, because when when we filed a suit in Washington claiming that Rumsfeld and the Pentagon was restricting press coverage of the war in Iraq, well, this judge basically told the government lawyers that he was going to find that we had a First Amendment right to cover the press. So he said, you better be back here in my office tomorrow. So the next day they came back to the judge's office. This is federal court in Washington. And with this whole elaborate plan to embed all the press with the troops in Iraq. And that's all because of one lonely hustler reporter standing out there demanding for months, you know, that we were entitled to this access. Not a single member of the mainstream media would help fight this fight.
When you I know one of the issues in one of the cases we're going to talk about, which is portrayed in the movie, the Hustler magazine versus Falwell, you initially had trouble, didn't you, getting mainstream news organizations to support your case, the New York Times and the Washington, they were all reluctant to go along, is that correct?
Yes, I couldn't believe it because it had the potential to affect them directly in a big way. As far as the bottom line goes. I could not understand why that NBC, ABC, CBS, the Washington Post, New York Times, why all of these publications would refuse to at least submit an amicus brief. Well, what happened, you know, to give you a little bit leading up to that, maybe you'll understand it better, is Falwell used to preach against me on his old-time gospel hour for about 15 years, blaming me for every ill that society embodied. So I told my staff one day, I said, let's have some fun with the Reverend, you know, let's do a parody or a satire, and see how he likes it. So he didn't like it very much, and he sued me. Well, a lawyer reminded me that he had sued me in Lynchburg, Virginia, which was his backyard, and we would not fare very favorable with a jury there, and that we should try to settle it. I said no. So we go to trial, and I got to give the jury credit for one thing. I mean, this parody was so far off the wall that nobody could have believed it. So no average person could have ever taken this to be serious. So for that reason, the jury found that there was no libel. But they were still, you know, a Southern Baptist jury, and they wanted to take care of Reverend Falwell. So they wanted to award him $200,000 for emotional distress because I hurt his feelings or his wife's feelings or his dog's feelings or whatever. So when we went to the Fourth Circuit, we lost again. So the pressure was really on me to settle the case, and I said, you know, it's just not right, you know, because if you settle a case, you know, at the circuit level, you know, that's going to set precedents, you know, for the rest of the country in many situations. So I didn't want that to happen. I wanted, you know, all or nothing. So then none of the mainstream media, as I talked about before, would support us. And I think the reason was they never felt that the Supreme Court would grant cert on that case. So when the Supreme Court did, then they all came on. They were on the bandwagon, like, you know, big time. You know, everybody was filing their briefs, and all their lawyers was calling and giving my lawyers advice. Because then I think they always knew how important it was, but now that the Supreme Court was going to be forced to make a decision on it, the whole landscape would change on the result of that. And parody was very commonplace in the media, but it was not protected speech. And that's what we were trying to achieve, was to make parody protected speech. And I'll tell a brief story about the Falwell case, which is one of my favorite ones, and you don't hear about it because, you know, it hasn't been written in a book, or it's too long for TV. I answer for TV, but it's really funny. I go to the Supreme Court that day that my attorneys are arguing my case. And I'm sitting in the gallery right across from the Reverend Falwell and his family. And it looks like a picture of Norman Rockwell, you know. And I thought, pornographer and the preacher, I'm dead. And so, the Supreme Court is a very staid place. You're not allowed to show any emotions there whatsoever in terms of laughter, you know, crying, yelling, you know, clapping. You know, I mean, you'll be evicted immediately if that happens. When you, no matter what kind of case is being argued before the high court, you'll be able to drop a pin anywhere in that gallery and it can be heard. So when my lawyer goes up, and he was having a dialogue with Scalia, and Scalia asked him, says, will you tell me what purpose is served by having the Reverend Falwell humiliated like this in this parody? And so my lawyer says, well, Justice Scalia, I'd seen a cartoon yesterday. They showed Washington being led to the Capitol on an ass, and the caption underneath the cartoon was, who's leading the ass to Washington? So Scalia said, I understand that, I get it. I accept it. I think George gets it. I think he accepts it. But that's a long way from having sex with your mother in an outhouse in Virginia. So, and when he said that, the whole gallery in the Supreme Court just burst into laughter. And Ron Smola, when he wrote the book about the trial, in his research in history, he said that that had never, in the history of the Supreme Court, had ever happened before. So I thought that was a classic story you might enjoy.
Now, long after that case, you and Jerry Falwell sort of went on the road together. You were here at the University of Virginia doing speeches together. Now, a lot of people will wonder, how could you ever kind of mend fences and get together? Can you talk a little bit about that?
Well, my mother used to tell me, she says, no matter how much disdain that you have for someone, if you will sit down and talk to them, you will always find certain qualities about them that you like. So, based on my mother's thesis, I decided to meet with Falwell. And, you know, I found him a big teddy bear. He come off to the whole country as being very vicious and very mean, but he just knew what he was selling, and he knew how he had to sell it. I remember after our friendship started, I turned on the TV one morning and there's this big news program about the Teletubbies being gay, according to Jerry Falwell. You know.
I think they were. I think they all were.
He's saying because of the way they would dress, wearing the purple and all that. So I called him up on the phone and I said, Jerry, you're the most recognizable preacher in the whole world. I said, well, you want to blow it all on the issue of whether the Teletubbies are gay? I said, who cares? You know? I said, where did you get that story? He said, well, so one of the kids at the college paper, they had did something on it, and I just kind of took it and ran with it. So I did become friends with Falwell after I thoroughly trashed him good. Happy that I won. And let's rest his soul.
Now, let's talk about some of your more recent endeavors, which have gotten some media attention. Anthony Weiner, and Casey Anthony, they have not responded. What's the status on those requests?
Anytime, you know, politicians or celebrities are in the news in an adverse way, we always make them an opportunity to, if they have all the proper assets, to pose in Hustler magazine. In Weiner's case, we were going to offer him a job as the head of our social networking. Hustler website. But Casey Anthony, we made an offer that we were very serious about, and we did with the bonus that we had to it based on sales. She could make $2 or $3 million. She is not going to be able to make that kind of money anywhere else, because the mainstream media is not going to pay her. There's no place else she can go. So I think at some time, she might come knocking on her door. So far, they haven't responded.
Well, it's good that you're trying to bring down the unemployment rate in America, because that's important. In terms of some of the other things that you offer money for, you are also offering money for anybody to come forward with some illicit sexual situation involving Rick Perry. Why Rick Perry?
Well, you see, we've been doing this.
I mean, there's a lot of people on the Republican side.
For 35 years, you know, and first of all, we get accused a lot of picking on Republicans and not Democrats, but there's something you got to know about the conventional wisdom in Washington. If there's a scandal and Republicans are involved, it's supposed to be money. And if it's Democrats involved, it's supposed to be sex. Well, in all actuality, it's the complete opposite. The Republicans are the sex freaks. The Democrats are after the money. But we always make these offers, and whatever after the first of the year, we'll be running a full-page ad in the Washington Post where we'll offer up to $1 million for anyone that can establish that they've had an illicit sexual relationship with one of the politicians. Now, I often get accused of people who say you're only interested in exposing people's sex life. That's not true. I want to expose the hypocrisy, because hypocrisy is the greatest threat that democracy has. You know, and the only way I can, in my position, can help get rid of some of this hypocrisy is try to create a revolving door in Washington, whether it's David Venner, who we got, and Craig, the guy playing footsie in the bathroom in Minnesota, and Bob Livingston during the Clinton impeachment affairs. Now that was a doozy. Here's a guy, this is when they were trying to impeach Clinton, and he was spearheading the impeachment. His name was Robert Livingston. And he said that he had never had an affair with an aide in his office or any federal employee. Well, we found out that he was wrong on all three of those accounts. Once we busted him on that and we had the goods, he had no wiggle room there at all, and he immediately resigned. So he did an interview from the steps of the Capitol at the New York Times, and they asked him, they said, "What do you think about Larry Flynt?" And he said, "I think he's a bottom feeder." So the Times called me for a comment, and I said, "Yeah, that's right, but look what I found when I got down there."
Now, you have found that it's not just the current politicians that have been involved with sexual dalliances. In fact, your book goes back right to the beginning of the Republic, and you find a lot of sex scandals throughout history. Can you tell us a little bit about how you came to write that book that is going to be on sale this evening?
Well, as I said, for the last 35 years, we've been involved in exposing corrupt politicians, and I was talking to my agent, about the possibility of maybe doing a roundup of all the people we had exposed, but then that didn't sound too interesting to me. And it was his suggestion. He said, what about if we go back in history to the beginning of the founding of the nation and try to log all of these sex scandals that happened over the years from the days the nation was founded up until today, and try and see if you can make a connection between how the book was supposed to be between the sex lives of presidents, first ladies, mistresses, and lovers. And we wanted to be able to establish how these liaisons had affected policy, both foreign and U.S. And we found in many cases that these women who were never elected become some of the most powerful people in the country. And I point out, for example, there's Dolly Madison, who was there with James Madison in the beginning, and also Eleanor Roosevelt is another one. But you know, you can continue to go, and Edith Galt, who was married to a Princeton guy. What's his name?
Woodrow Wilson? Wilson?
No, Princeton. He was the president.
I think it was Wilson, isn't it? Wilson, I think was.
Yeah, Wilson, who was president, and she was a very, very powerful first lady. And for 3 months, she was actually running the White House because he had been totally incapacitated by a stroke, with some very important votes pending on the Treaty of Versailles and other issues before the Senate. And I think that did a lot to make a warning for future presidents in terms of how succession goes. But the exploits of some of these people in the book is phenomenal. I'd heard rumors, and I thought it will basically be innuendos, but probably the two worst was Harding and Wilson. It's been said that Wilson preferred the brothels of Paris, and Harding preferred the whorehouses of Columbus, Ohio. Kennedy, but we never found, Kennedy was quite a ladies' man, but you know, one thing that we never found is because somebody had an active libido, he was any less of an effective leader or commander-in-chief.
Let me ask, I think we're almost out of time here tonight, and it's getting late, but let me ask you about two very different figures and your feelings about those. One would be Hugh Hefner, and the other would be Barack Obama. And what your feelings are about them now, and
they're not related.
Not related, no. They've never had sexual affairs with each other, at least we know that. So, Hugh Hefner first. How do you feel about Hef?
Well, I know Hef personally. I've known him for many, many years. But he's about 20 years older than me, and so he definitely has lived a much more gratifying life than I have. But it's easy for me, knowing Hef as I do and looking over the empire, to realize what happened. And Hef was never a publisher, never a businessman. He was always an artist. I think he's still very much stuck in the 50s when he created the Marilyn Monroe Centerfold. And any venture that he made into business with the Playboy clubs and with the Playboy resorts, you know, and the gambling casinos, they all went belly up, because I think that Hef felt that he could just delegate management to these various entities in the country and everything would be okay. But it didn't work out so well. Now on Obama. Look, and one thing you might as well accept about our political system: we're scraping the bottom of the barrel. Obama is a nice man. He's very admirable, he's honest, he wants to do what's right for the country. But he had no experience when he came into office. That's been his biggest problem, not necessarily the adversarial relationship with the Republican Party. I think Obama, he's a Harvard grad, the lawyer, you know, he's smart, you know, he knows what to do. So he's got to understand that the American people want a fighter. They want a Rocky, you know, they want somebody who will go the distance even if he can't win, because they respect that and they love that in a leader. Now, Obama can turn this thing around, but that's the only way he's going to be able to do it.
Okay, and now we're going to throw it back to Josh, who has a special presentation tonight.
Well, don't leave, because we're not quite done, but we are going to have to break the set for a little bit. But I want to give you a little bit of an explanation beforehand. As was mentioned in the conversation, this is not Mr. Flynt's first visit to Charlottesville. 11 years ago, he came for a conference that the Thomas Jefferson sponsored on the landmark case of Hustler versus Jerry Falwell. It was a great day. I got to tell you, it really was one of the highlights, I think, of the Thomas Jefferson Center's programs. The two of them were articulate. They disagreed fervently, but did so in a very enjoyable and witty way. And two men who essentially made their lives based on the First Amendment, on their exercise of their First Amendment rights. But they had very different views about what the First Amendment was. We'll jump ahead, and it's 15th anniversary of the People versus Larry Flynt. And we very much wanted Mr. Flynt to come back.
Yeah, just come out here so you can see.
We very much wanted Mr. Flynt to come back. And so when I was out in Los Angeles this summer, he was kind enough to allow me to come visit him. And I was a little worried that he might not either remember the event or remember me. I'm not sure he did, but that's all right. But I go into his office, huge office, beautiful office, and I walk to his desk. I'm nervous as all get out, but there, right behind his desk, and he'll can confirm this, was a picture that I sent him of of Mr. Flynt and Mr. Falwell in front of the Thomas Jefferson Center banner taken from that day at the conference. And from that moment on, I was much more confident that we might be able to get him to come back. I jumped and said, "That's us, that's us." Anyway, when Mr. Flynt was here 11 years ago, he was actually here on his birthday. We're 3 days beyond your birthday now. But we at the center wanted to come up with something that we hope you will enjoy as much as that photograph of Mr. Falwell. You'll see that photograph in a minute at the beginning of this film. You'll see the one that I'm talking about. But it's important to know a little bit of the context. One big change since you were here 11 years ago, we have built in Charlottesville the one-of-its-kind monument to the First Amendment. And it essentially is, the main component of it is, as everyone in Charlottesville knows, is a giant chalkboard on which people can come and exercise their right of free expression, saying whatever they want, or writing or drawing whatever they want. Do you guys like the chalkboard or hate it? Who many here? Well, with that in mind, what would be more appropriate to do something for Larry Flynt than to do it on the First Amendment monument, the giant chalkboard freedom of speech walls? Here it is. Ladies and gentlemen, please extend your thanks to Clay Calvert, Rob Richards, and of course, Mr. Larry Flynt.